Okay, we are live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Work Better Club session on the precision model of communication. My name is Swapnil Kamat. I am the CEO of Work Better Training, and I invite you all, and I'm very happy that we have 36 odd people that have come to attend this class on a Saturday evening. I know life has been very hectic, life has been very strange, life has been very different as compared to what it was otherwise. But I'm glad to see that we have 36 people actually taking the effort of coming on a Saturday to improve their skills, and especially their communication skills, which are so important to make a better life for themselves, right? So I welcome you all to this session. For those of you all who are relatively new to this session, um, for those of you who are relatively new to this, I can see a few of our regulars that are here. But for the few of our new people that are here, this session is going to be a 90-minute long session. In that 90-minute, after the 90-minute odd session, we are going to have close to half an hour to 40 minutes of probably what we call an after class, where we will answer all your questions so that when you leave this session, you will be fully satisfied with the input that you've got during this session. Okay. Now, before we go on and move on any further, um, I want to quickly run you through the ground rules. A lot of you are clear about it, but for the ease of conducting this session, your cameras and microphones have been muted. Now, to start with, please type a big yes in the chat box if you can see me and hear me clearly. Pratyush already knows the drill. So even before I could complete the sentence, Pratyush has put his big yes in it. So I'm happy to have such a good student. Nice to see so many of my regulars that are here. Yes, Gopal, yeah, I have so many of them. Tanmay is here. Yes, okay, cool. So we have, I assume you can hear me and listen to me clearly. I'm wearing a different Nehru coat today. I thought I'd wear something slightly different. I got bored of wearing the same old clothes. So I thought I'd make it a little fancy for you. Okay. So at the end of the session, I will take questions. And if you have any questions, please put your questions down in the Q&A box. So we will use this chat box when I ask you a few questions and I ask you to participate anyway. That's where you use your chat box. And if you have any questions at whatever point of time, please put your questions down in the Q&A box, because I will take questions only from there. At the end of the session, there will be an assessment link that will be sent. If you get 70% plus or more in that, you will get a certificate saying that you've attended this session. So these are the ground rules of today. Okay. Now let's get started, my friends. Effective communication. So first, let's try to understand what effective communication is, because if you do not understand what effective communication is, you will have a lot of problems in understanding this topic, and you'll have just a lot of problems otherwise. As I have repeatedly said in multiple sessions connected to the topic of communication, I have said that communication skills is the single most important skill in the knowledge economy if you want to do well in your career. It's that simple. It is the number one most important skill, because the reason behind that is all your work for the rest of your life, whether you like it or not, will happen through your communication skills. Okay, I repeat, all your work for the rest of your life, irrespective of what you do in your life, all your work will happen through your communication, right? That through your communication could be verbal communication, it could be written communication, it could be any form. What do I mean by that? If your client or your boss needs to brief you on something, they will brief you through communication. If you need to then do the work and send it back to them, it's going to happen through communication, right? It doesn't matter what industry you're in, it doesn't matter what seniority you're in, everything is going to be through communication. And therefore, if that channel through which all your work is going to happen is broken or is not strong, you are very, very unlikely to do well in your career if the channel through which all the work happens itself is broken. And that's why at the Work Better Club, we lay such a big emphasis on improving your communication skills, right? Because that's solid results It has solid results for you in your real life if you can do that well, right? I'm sure most of y'all would have noticed that any professional at very senior levels, they're always very good communicators, right? So that's the importance of this topic, and I'll get more to the precision model of it, right? Now, what is effective communication? Effective communication is about exchanging information in a way that it is understood specifically, clearly, and without any doubt, right? So I often give the difference between what I tell people is communication is exchanging of information between people. Effective communication is about exchanging information in a way where it's understood specifically, clearly, and without any doubt, right? So communication is just exchanging. Effective communication is exchanging it in a way where it's understood specifically, clearly, and without any doubt, right? And if you have to do these three things, which are the three most important words in communication, you have to do it by doing precise communication, right? This is a cheap proof, precise communication. Now, the second thing that you're trying to do as an effective business communicator is you're trying to get objective driven or objectives met. And what that very simply means is that each and every um, communication that you will do in the sphere of business will always have an objective. Now, what does objective mean? Objective means what is the purpose of communication? What is the goal of communication? What do you wish to achieve at the end of the communication? Or, like we often say, the best way to think about objective is what action exactly do you want from the other side at the end of your communication, right? So that's the framework that you need to think of, that all business communication is always objective driven. You're never going to write an email to somebody if there's no objective behind it. You're never going to pick the call and call somebody in a business setting if there's no objective behind it. You're never going to make a presentation in business if there's no objective behind it, right? So there is always some objective behind your business communication. Therefore, what is effective communication? Effective communication is your ability to communicate in a way where the information, ideas, feelings, whatever it is that you're sending across are understood by the other person specifically, clearly, without any doubt. When he's sending those ideas to you, you understand them specifically, clearly, without any doubt. And the second important thing is when you are communicating to another person, ensure that your objectives are met, right? When you're communicating to the other person, and for your objectives to be met, you must be crystal clear on what those objectives are. If you are not crystal clear on what those objectives are, you are never going to be able to do this well, right? If you do effective business communication, right? And of course, if the lack of clarity and specificity in communication can cause misunderstandings, lead to wasted time and effort, and result in conflict, right? That is what tends to happen when you are a terrible communicator, okay? Now, what is precise communication? Precise communication is the combination of your ability to make your communication specific, your ability to make it concise, and your ability to make it clear and simple, right? So these are the three things that are involved, and I'm going to break each one of them down for you and try to explain each one of these things so that you become a better communicator. And if you just understand these things, literally from tomorrow, you can improve the way you communicate. Okay, so let's start with specific communication. Now, I have a question for all of you all, right? And you need to use the chat box basically to give what your answer is. You can just give one answer, okay? Now, there are 7 examples here. There are 6 examples here. Read all these examples and tell me, out of these 6 examples that are written here, which one is the most specific of these 6, right? So whatever your answer is, put it in the chat box. Okay, I have a lot of people saying 6. One person saying 5, one person saying 2, one person saying 3, somebody saying 4, 5. Okay, it is number 6, but it's difficult to execute, so I'll go with number 4. Okay, that's what you're saying. Maya says number 4. Okay, thank you very much for participating, my friends. Thank you very, very much. Okay, now I have asked this, I've shown this screen in person and over these kind of sessions to literally hundreds and thousands of people, and when I show the screen to people, the answers are exactly like the answers you all gave, right? It's a mixed bag of answers. When I ask people which one of these 6 is the most specific, that's what when I ask them, right? And the right answer to that is the 6th one, right? The 6th one is the most specific. Now, I'm not saying that while communicating and asking for water, you must always use the 6th one. No, it's not possible to tell somebody in most practical situation that, oh, I want it at 30 degrees and stuff like that. No, this is just for me to understand whether you know what specific means or not. The 6th one is the most specific. You may not in a practical situation get to use it, but at least you must be fully aware of what specific communication means. Okay. Now, when I share this with people, a lot of people mistake specific communication with making your communication short. And as a matter of fact, specific means in a way the bang opposite, because the minute you make your communication specific, it can never be short. It tends to be more lengthier actually when you make your communication specific. But a lot of people mistake it for it, especially people that say number 2, right, or number 3, right? So they don't really know what specific communication means, right? Now, let me give you an example of how I thought of this example and why I wrote it down. Okay, very interesting, because that's why I tend to like to give this example. So I have a driver. I live in Bombay, and my driver has been working with me. His name is Guru, right? Very intelligent, very smart guy. And he's been working with me for close to 10 years now. Okay. In the first month of Guru joining me as a driver, we had gone to do one of these programs 10 years back, where we were doing what is called an outbound program, right? What is an outbound program? Basically, there are lots of adventure activities, and through those adventure activities, you tend to have some learnings that come out of it. So it was a very hot day. And what happened on that hot day is I was feeling very thirsty, and I was busy kind of talking about something and giving a brief on something, and I was very thirsty. So I just called Guru and I said, Guru, mere liye thoda pani lana. Guru, get me some water, please. So Guru he went to the closest kind of tap that was there. He got some glass, he went to the closest tap, he filled that water and he gave it to me. And I said, where did you get this water from? He said, I just filled it at the tap there. So I said, no. I said, I don't want that. I said, please get me some mineral water, right? So he said, okay, I'll get you some mineral water. So he went to the shop, he came back, and this time Guru comes back with, I said, get me some water. That's what I said, right? Which was the first one. I said the first one to him, right? So then I said, no, I don't want any water. I get me some mineral water. That's what I said to him. He said, okay, I'll get you some mineral water. We went to the shop. And this time he came back with a chilled bottle of water, right? So I said, oh, no, Guru, I don't want chilled bottle of water. I want sada, or I want room temperature. That's what I told him. Please get me a room temperature bottle of water. So he goes to the shop again. This time I see him coming back, but he's coming back with one of those brands where it seems like the shopkeeper has just filled the bottle right there at his shop only, and he's giving it to you, right? Sometimes you go and they give you such brands. So he got some brand which was crumpled and it didn't look very good. So I said, no, Guru, I can't have this one. I said, give me a 1 liter bottle, give it to me, sada or room temperature, and I want one of these well-known brands like Kinley, Bailey, Aquafina, Bisleri, one of these ones. So go and get it for me. So then Guru goes again to the shop and he comes back, but this time there's no water in his hand. So I said, Guru, where's the water? He said, nahi hai unke paas. They don't have it. Right? So I'm like, Arey yaar, I said, now, okay, Guru, 1 liter bottle, these 4 brands, I need it to be room temperature. Jab tak milta nahi dhondo, or 10-15 minutes se zyada nahi lagna chahiye. So please go to that shop, not that shop, go to some other shop, but get the bottle of water. Right? And then, of course, the next time that Guru came, he came with a bottle of Bisleri, room temperature, 1 liter, everything was right? Now, because 10 years back, because of my ineffective communication or my poor communication, I made Guru travel 4 times to different shops. The fault is not his. The fault largely is mine. If I want to be a good communicator, I need to communicate to him in a way where he can just go once and get that bottle of water. So the fault lies with me. Now, of course, you can argue and you should think that Guru should have asked questions, right? So that's the other way. The fault is mine. The fault is that of the sender. But if Guru was a good communicator, Guru would have said, okay, get me some water is not a specific brief, right? So I need to ask questions to understand exactly what this guy wants so that I don't need to go to the shop 5 times, right? So effective communication is about the sender, but effective communication is also about the listener or the receiver. So I was a poor communicator and he was a poor communicator, and that's why he had to make 4 trips. And this is what happens in most of our work life. Okay, now Guru is worked with me for 10 years. So today, if I have to brief him after 10 years, do you think I need to brief him saying, Guru, I need 1 liter, these 4 bottles, da, 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 da. Do you think I need to do that? If you think I need to do that, give me a yes or a no. What do you think? Right? Good. But you should give me a big no. Today, after 10 years, I don't need to go into all those details while briefing him because he's worked with me for 10 years. So today, if I tell Guru, saying, Guru, get me a bottle of water, if I say that to him, that's enough. He knows that is room temperature unless mentioned otherwise. He knows it's 1 liter. He knows if he can't get 1 liter, he can get 2 500 ml or 4 250 ml. He knows that if he has to go, he can't just go to one shop and come back. He needs to go and find the bottle and come back because you'll get the water somewhere or the other, no? So he knows he needs to do that as well. So he knows all these things connected to it. So today, if I have to brief him, I don't need to say the entire thing. But 10 years back when I had to brief him, it was my job, if I was a good communicator, to ensure that I told him the exact thing or the specific thing so that he didn't need to make 4 trips to the shop. Okay. Now, let's assume that Guru quits. I hope he doesn't. He's a lovely guy. But Guru quits and I get a new driver today. Okay. Don't you think if I have to ask that driver to get me water, I would have to brief him in a specific manner where I'll have to tell him, Bhai, if you're getting water for me, I need a 1 liter bottle. I need one of these 4 brands that are there. I need it at room temperature, and please ensure that you get it. Don't come back without getting it, right? So I'll have to get more specific with somebody that's new. So the point that I'm trying to make here is your ability to make communication specific is very, very, very important, right? This is one of the biggest problems with our business communication. However, how specific you make your communication depends on the situation and the person that you're with, right? And with the same person in 2 different time spans and 2 different situations, the amount of specificity will change, right? So it's not one standard thing. But in my experience of training thousands of people on the subject of communication, most people tend to err, or they're on the side of not making their communication specific as opposed to making it too specific, right? Most people are on this side where they just don't make it specific at all, right? Now, I'll give you another example. If you've seen in 5-star hotels or any good hotels where their staff is well trained in the restaurants, if you go and if you ask for a cold drink, if you say, get me a Diet Coke, he will always ask you, do you want a chilled one or do you want it at room temperature? At some of the bad hotels, what they'll do, where their people are not well trained, is they will just open the bottle and they'll get it, right? And then you will fight with them, say, "Arey, itna thanda nahi chahiye tha." As a matter of fact, some of the good hotels, what they'll do is they'll actually get the bottle to you and they'll ask you to touch the bottle. So they basically they're trying to say, isse aur specific nahi ho sakta, right? So they'll actually give you the bottle and they'll say, touch it and you tell me whether this is the amount, this is the temperature that you want. And then when you nod your head and say, they'll open it and they'll give it to you, right? And this often comes from training, often this comes from experience. Okay, but all the good hotels, they will never open the bottle before they actually ask you questions of how chilled you want it, show you that, and then give it to you, right? Because they're trying to make it as specific as possible to avoid loss and mistakes. Okay, now let me show you another one. Okay, out of these 7, if you don't know what the situation is, out of these 7, which one is the most specific? Whatever you think, give me your number in the chat box. And again, you have to understand that I'm not asking you which one is right and which one is wrong, right? Because given, like I mentioned, given the person in the situation, you'll sometimes have to use number one, sometimes you'll have to use number seven, so you'll have to use whatever. But if you don't know anything about the situation, and if you had to say which one is the most specific, if you don't know anything about the situation. Okay. Now, good. I'm getting very different answers. That's good. That's exactly what we need to do. Now, I repeat, if you don't know anything about the situation, this is not about choosing the right or the wrong, right? Because in different situations with different people, you will have to go in with different options of what you end up saying with them. However, if you don't know anything about the situation and somebody asks you that which one is the most specific of these seven, the answer is the seventh one, right? Of these seven. Now, why is the seventh one the most specific? Somebody tell me in the chat box, the people that said the seventh one is the most specific, that voted for the seventh one. Why is the seventh one the most specific? And the people that wrote say number one. Why do you think number one is the most specific? Yes, Bindu is saying specifically given date and time, but sixth also has tomorrow and a time, right? So why is the seventh more specific than the sixth one? Again, I have people saying sixth is preferable. I'm not even asking you whether what's preferable or not, right? Any one of these things could be preferable depending on the situation. I'm asking you of these seven, which is the most specific in its communication, right? Yes, so Bindu says at and not by 4, correct? Now, more often than not, let me give you an example. So out of these seven, if you don't know what the situation is, the seventh one is the most situation, but you could use any one of these seven, right? Depending on the situation. Now, so no, Govind is saying if the situation one may be used. That's again, that's not what I'm asking at all. So you've not understood what I'm asking at all, right? So why is the seventh and why not the sixth? Because the sixth essentially is saying by 4 p.m., which means I will get back to you anytime by 4 p.m. The fourth one is, the seventh one is more specific than that because it says I will get back to you at the exact time, right? Now, more often than not, if you have to ask somebody to send something across, you will say, please send this to me by 4 p.m., right? Because you don't care whether they send it at 12 p.m., whether they send it at 10 a.m., whether they send it at 3 p.m., as long as you get it by 4 p.m. So more often than not, we will use this if you have to ask somebody to send something across to you. However, in certain situations, if you're, say, setting up an appointment, right, with somebody, or you're starting a webinar for that matter, right, you would have to say, we're going to start this webinar at 6 p.m., right? Of yes, like our training starts at 6 p.m., right? So that's very specific. We're going to start at that exact moment is when we're going to start it. So if you don't know anything about the situation, the seventh one is the most specific, right? But you use the sixth situation more often than not. The sixth point is what you use. Now, let's look at the fifth one. I will get back to you EOD tomorrow. So EOD means basically end of day tomorrow. Why is this not as specific as, say, this? Why is the fifth one not as specific as the sixth one? Somebody tell me. Why is the fifth one not as specific as the sixth one? So Bindu is already very good. So this is the answer, right? Here it is not a specific time because my end of the day could be 5 p.m. Your end of the day could be 8 p.m. Now somebody could argue saying, no, end of day should be the office's official time. But you know, yeah, today there is no such thing as an office official time. Even there is in the knowledge economy, nobody really gives that much importance to it. So let's look at a problem, right? So if I tell one of my colleagues saying, listen, I want this to be submitted to me by end of the day today, and I expect that end of the day in my head is 6 p.m., but my colleague is thinking on the other side, at the end of the day, I sit at office till 9 p.m. So I'll send it till 9 p.m., right? And she sends it at 9 p.m. Now I'm waiting for it at 6 p.m. And then I blame my colleague saying, Arey, tune bheja hi nahi. I expected it at end of the day, right? That's not good communication. If I want it by 6 p.m., I can't say get back to me by EOD. I need to say get back to me with this report by 6 p.m. today. Whatever time you want to send it, you send it to me by that time. Now, let's look at another situation where using EOD, if I'm a boss and I have a subordinate and I tell that subordinate saying, please send me this report by EOD today. Please send it to me by EOD today. Now, when would it be a perfectly fine thing to say, if I am going to look at the report tomorrow morning, right? फिर तुम 8 बजे भेजो या 12 बजे भेजो, मुझे क्या फर्क पड़ता है? I want it tomorrow morning, so I've told you that please send it to me end of day today. Whatever your end of day is up to you. So the point that I'm trying to make is, in different situations, you will use different things of these 7. So I'm not trying to say one is right and the other is wrong. But the thing that you need to understand is what is specific communication, right? That's what you need to understand. Now, let's look at the second one, for example. I will get back to you ASAP. This is a term that is used a lot, right, in corporate life. But what does ASAP really mean? If I ask each one of you all, what does ASAP mean according to you? You will say ASAP means as soon as possible. But if somebody tells you to do something ASAP, you are basically trying as soon as possible to you. So that could be like 15 minutes, or that could be 2 days, right? It's as soon as possible to you, to the other person, right? Now, it's not that ASAP can't be used. ASAP also should be used. And more often than not, when a sender is sending a message saying, I want this ASAP, what he's trying to tell the person is, he's trying to show him that, okay, I have a certain urgency towards this matter, but I leave the discretion up to you as to when you can send it, but I need this as urgently as you can possibly send it to me. That's what he should mean by ASAP. When you can't really what you call it, put a time on somebody else, you just say give it to me ASAP in that situation. But there's no time involved, and every person can interpret it differently, and people do end up interpreting it differently, right? So again, if you have a fixed deadline towards something, you can't say ASAP. You need to give the exact time. But if you can't give that exact time to the person because you're in no position to, you can say ASAP to kind of tell him that it's urgent without, you can't force him into giving it to you by a certain time, right? So that's in another situation you could use that, right? But you have to understand that out of these 7, the 7th one is the most specific, right? Good participation from everyone. I'm liking the activity happening on the chat box. Okay, if you have any questions, put the questions in the Q&A box. Okay, now let's look at another example. Okay, so read this entire thing and tell me which one do you think is the most specific of these 7. Okay, a lot of 7s, a lot of 7s, a lot of 7s. Again, I repeat, if you don't know anything about the situation, out of these 7, which one is the most specific? Yeah. So again, the answer to this is the 7th one. Now, somebody like Vinay Kulkarni, or even if you write 6, or if you write 2, or if you write 1, or if you write any one of the others from 6 to 2, you're not really clear on what specific communication means, right? Specific communication, the 7th one is the most specific of these 7, right? It's the most specific of it. Now, let's try to understand. Okay, here, now let's look at these 2, right? This is again 2 more examples. Go ahead and take a right is unspecific. Go 2 kilometers ahead from here, you will come across a crossroad, take the right there, go approximately 500 meters ahead, and you will reach the house, right? That's more specific. Now look at, this is a very good one. The second example again is a good one, right? Unspecific is, if you continue coming late, severe action will be taken against you. Specific is, if you come late for 3 days in a month, we will be forced to cut a day's pay from your salary. Okay, now I have a question for you. I can't, we've given you we've given you 5 examples for you to understand what specific communication is. So I'm assuming that the bulk of y'all, the bulk of the 60 people now here have understood what specific communication means. So I have a question for you and give your answer in the chat box. If you had to explain, because I've given you 5 examples and shown you this, but if you had to explain to somebody how to make communication more specific, what would you tell them? How do you go about making communication more specific? So give me 2 or 3 points of what tends to make communication more specific. Give your answers in the chat box. More answers, more answers, more answers. I want everybody to answer. So Prasant says to the point. Oh, as a matter of fact, no, the specific communication doesn't really mean to the point, right? To the point means something slightly different, which we're coming to. Is a very important part of communication. Pallab says why, when, what, how mentioned, okay? In detailed information. Okay, so we have some very good answers. Lakshmi Prasad says precisely and clearly. But what does precisely mean? We're taught this entire topic is about precision model of communication, right? So in that, what is, so Sudak Karan says, yeah, what, when, why, where, how, whom, all those things should be there. Very good. Okay. Now, let me give you the answer. There are two most important things that you need to keep in mind if you want to make your communication more specific. And those two important things is specific communication means giving relevant details, right? So the key word is detailing your communication. That's what specific communication means. Number one, detailing, and number two is quantifying where possible, right? So these are the two most important things to remember if you want to understand how to make communication specific. Now, you have to remember this thing, guys. If you work in the corporate world enough, you will know that we appreciate any person that communicates with us in a specific way, right? If a boss gives us a specific brief, we appreciate that. If a customer gives us a specific brief, we appreciate that. While you are communicating to the customers, if you do it specifically, that's appreciated, right? So all, and more often than not, when you don't do that, people will ask you this thing, right? They'll say, can you be more specific? Can you be more specific? Can you be more specific? This is the thing that you'll hear all the time. So if you want to improve your communication, the first and most important thing that you need to do is work on making your communication specific, and which most people don't do, right? Because they don't know how to do it, right? That's the reason why they don't know how to apply themselves to do it. So there are two things to do: detail out your communication, and number two, quantify it. Okay, now let's take one of the examples which is there on the screen. Let's see how it became more specific immediately when you use these two principles of communication. Now, what did you do here? Look at example 2. You said, if you continue coming late, okay, you said, if you continue coming late, severe action will be taken against you, right? This is what you said essentially. If you continue coming late, severe action will be taken against you. Now, look at how you made it specific. If you said, if you come late 3 days in a month, sorry, if you come late 3 days in a month, so you quantified it here, we will be forced to cut a day's pay from your salary, right? So here you quantified detail, right? You've given some detail. So in 3 places you quantified, immediately this became more specific than the one on top, which is not detailed, is not quantified. Now let's look at the example here. Go ahead and take a right. Now look at how this goes. Go 2 kilometers ahead, quantified. You will come across a crossroad, detail, right? Take the right there, detail, right? Which is there in the earlier one as well, but you're giving that detail, right? Detail. Go approximately 500 meters ahead, quantify. You will reach the house, detail. Are you getting it? So the minute you start quantifying and giving it detail, that's automatically when your communication will get better, and you'll find the same trend everywhere. Why is this more the most what do you call it, specific of these seven? Because here, look at this, you quantified it, you've given the necessary details, you made it as detailed as possible, so that's what you've done, and that's the reason why it became specific. Let's look at this example which is there right here. What's happening here? You quantified it, right? So this is the simple kind of thing that you need to do in order to make your communication more specific, right? So we discussed this earlier. Be mindful of the situation and the person you are talking to. So be mindful of who you're talking to. Depending on that, decide how to make it specific. You need to, it needs to revolve around giving important and relevant details. And one of the ways, two of the ways to think about how to give the detail is to think about who, what, why, when, where, how, right? You can think about this. It's not like in every case you're communicating all the time, right? So when you're communicating all the time, in every case, you can't use this logic of who, what, why, when, where, how. But there are lots of places where you can use it. So use that framework, and I'll give you an example of it. And the other way to think about the relevant, the important details is to anticipate any question that the receiver may have, right? If you think, what are the details that he could want, or what are the questions he could have? If you use that framework, automatically you can think of more details to give, right? Then ensure that you quantify the communication. And of course, like we've discussed, keep the communication specific yet concise. And our concise is our second point. So we're going to get to that, okay? Now, how do you go about using this thing practically? Okay, how do you go about using it practically? So this is the trick that you need to use. So from today onwards, let's assume that you're writing a WhatsApp message, or you're writing an email, or you're speaking verbally, but just let's take the written communication bit, which is a message or the email. Now, after you type down your message, or after you type it down, your message is there in front of you. Now just ask yourself these two questions. When you look at what you've written, ask yourself, what details can I give here that I've not given, right? Ask yourself, how can I detail this out any further? That's the first question. Then you'll get some ideas. Oh, I can detail it out like this, right? And then you can put those additional details that are there. And the second thing that you ask yourself is, how can I quantify this thing? Are there places where I can quantify what I'm trying to say? So again, ask yourself those questions, and then again, see places that you can quantify. So first, write down whatever you have to write down, but before pressing the send button, this is the addition that you need to do. Think what details you can give, or think how you can quantify what you're saying, and automatically your communication will become so much more better than it was already. Okay, if you're clear on how you can go about actually using this, give me a big yes in the chat box, please. Okay, I think it's clear. Yes, now I want to repeat this before I go to the next slide. Yeah? In 10 years of being in this profession and training people across different industries and seniority, and for those of you all who know, we literally train India's biggest and best companies on the subjects of soft skills and behavior. In my experience, this is the biggest problem in people being ineffective communicators, them not making their communication specific. Now, I was asked this question a while back, saying, why do people not make their communication specific? And I often give three reasons for that, right? Number one reason why they don't make it specific is because they've not been trained on it, right? Because if you're not trained on the subject, you don't understand all these things too well. So then you don't end up doing it. That's the first reason. The second reason why people don't make it specific is, to make your communication specific requires you to put in more thought, right? It requires you to put in more effort and thought. That's what good, effective communication is about, better thought. And most people, while communicating, are not willing to put that effort and thought into it. And that's the reason why they miss out on the details and the quantifying. And that's the reason why their communication is poor, because they don't put the effort and thought. And the third point that I share with people is, which is connected to the second one, that people aren't willing to take the little bit of extra time that is required to make the communication specific. And then they have to spend even more time, like we saw in Guru's case, or like you see in your emails. If you make your email specific, there'll be lesser back and forth between you and the other side, right? Otherwise, you send a little bit of message, then there are questions that come up, then you need to again, so it goes, keeps, and more time is spent as a result. But we're not willing to invest that little bit of time that ends up making more time for us, right? So that's the reason why people don't end up making their communication specific, right? So now I'll just show you one sample of, you may not have the time, you can quickly read it. I'll keep quiet, quickly read it. And this is just an example of how somebody's used the principles that we spoke about, right? Of what, who, when, how. And this is a real email that the content person has put together. But very often this is what you can do while writing an email. You can say, what is it that I'm writing about, right? And then you can think of who are the people involved and when does this need to happen. So when do you need to share the cheat sheet with and by when, right? So the who and when is covered, and then the how is covered, right, in this. So that's another kind of way of writing your communication, when you think of the 5 W's and the 1 H, and that itself will help you put in a lot of the details that you may miss out on otherwise, right? Connected to it. So that's a little bit, but you don't always need to use this method. Like I said, you can use the method of 5W, 1H, or you can think, what are all the questions that the receiver will have about this issue that I'm writing about, right? You can think from that framework, or the third framework from to think of it. Just type your entire email, type all your thoughts that come to your head. After you're done with that, then just sit down and think, what are the details do I need to give this person, right? That will help the person understand this issue better, that will help meet my objective. So that's what you think. What are those things that I need to put across? Then you think, how do I quantify this further? And when you think of both these things, the quality of your communication will go up. Now, you can use this, of course, both in written and verbal communication. In verbal communication, the problem that happens is that you're doing it in real time. No, so as against typing an email where you have time to think, go back, backspace, delete a few things, put a few things. But when you're speaking, it often happens in real time. So a good thing to do in those situations when you're speaking and you need to be more specific, prepare in advance. If there is an important discussion that you need to have with somebody, right? Put down all the points that you want to discuss with them in writing first and have them in front of you. So when you have them in front of you and you're having that discussion, you will tend not to miss out on the points which you would otherwise do, because you're doing speaking in real time otherwise, right? So all important meetings, put down all the points that you need to discuss. Don't just say, no, I'll remember it later, right? It's a verbal conversation. No, put everything down. And then when you start the interaction with the person, you can also tell him that, listen, there are some 8 points that I want to discuss with you. And then you can take each point and then discuss it with him. And that will help you make your verbal communication much more specific, right? You don't do this, you're never going to be a good communicator. Okay, now this is the quick exercise, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to do it and put your answers down so that you really get the drift of it. Okay, now think of an example from your professional experience where you or someone else communicated in an unspecific way and convert the same into something which is specific. So this is the format that you need to do it in the chat box. Think of something unspecific that you would typically say at the workplace and make the same thing specific. So type was unspecific, write what you would typically say and make the same thing specific. Put it in your chat box so that I know that you understood this issue before we go on to the next topic. Don't be lazy towards doing the exercises, my friends. Come on, guys. Give me both the unspecific and the specific. Come on, come on. Okay, Lakshmipati is given one good example. Okay, we have some good examples. A lot of people have revolved their examples on the time basis. Good, but the good start. Okay, thank you very much. I have such a nice audience here. Yes, very good. So I think I am not going and talking about each and every person's answer, but fundamentally you have understood the topic. My only, after seeing the answer, the only thing that I'd like to share is there are two elements to it: detail and quantifying, right? I think a lot of us have understood the quantifying part, which is good, but it also involves giving details around it, right? So if you forget the detailing part when you're communicating a certain thing, that often ends up causing much more confusion, and it becomes communication that is not well thought through. And that's exactly what you want to avoid if you want to be a good communicator, right? Okay, let's go on. Good job, guys. Good job. I hope you've learned something interesting here. Now, concise communication. My God. So earlier, somebody had said that it's important to keep communication to the point. And I totally agree with that. You need to keep your communication to the point. However, ladies and gentlemen, when you make your communication specific, which means you're going to give more details, automatically the communication tends to become lengthier. Now, let me give you an example. A legal contract or a legal document between people, that legal document is often a very specific document, right? Why is it specific? And that's why it becomes lengthy automatically. It's specific because the lawyers are trying to go into as much of detail as possible to avoid any confusion, right? And that's why it becomes very detailed. As a matter of fact, if you look at legal books or law books, they are very, very thick, small font. Often those terms and conditions that they have that we never read, if you look at them, right? They're going into great specificity on those terms and conditions. We never read them, but they're saving their backside by putting it. But that is the thing that they're trying to do, is they're trying to get very, very specific to avoid any legal trouble or to avoid any problems that will happen in the future. And very often the problems that happen, legal problems, are often the cracks between that specificity that somebody finds, and then they try to make a case around that, right? So all legal documents are very, very specific, therefore very lengthy. However, if you're not a lawyer and in your day-to-day business communicator, and if you want to do it well, your communication must be specific on one side and concise on the other, right? These are literally two opposite forces working with each other. It needs to be specific on one side and concise on the other. And actually, the marriage of these two words, the marriage of the words specific and concise, has given rise to this new word of precise, right? Precise is a relatively new word in English, and it means a combination of it being specific and concise, making it precise, and therefore your communication needs to be precise. It shouldn't be too much, it shouldn't be too little, it should be just right and just to the point, right? When it comes to that, with the marriage of these two things. I hope that makes sense to you. Right now, that's the thing that's extremely difficult to do in business. But how do you make your communication concise, right? Now, being concise means to be able to convey everything that you want to in as few words as possible. It involves stating only the important and relevant information and avoiding irrelevant ones. That's what it means. So what it means from the point of view is, once you've written your email, you need to think saying, what are the details that I can give? Where can I quantify this, right? So then you think of all the details. Then you write the details down, but then you need to think, is each one of this detail important or not? Is each one of these details relevant or not? You're going to have to give it a thought, ladies and gentlemen. And maybe you'll realize in a few cases that, oh, no, this is not a very relevant detail. Then you knock it off from there, right? That's what you need to do. Knock it off from there, okay? And the same thing is true whether it comes to presentations that you will make, whether it is emails that you will write, or even when it comes to verbal communication. You need to be very careful about speaking to the point, being precise, right? Don't you see this happening ever so often with people? I'll just give you a simple example, right? Where you're in a business situation, you're talking about one point or one topic, and all of a sudden the person talking starts digressing and starts talking about a totally different issue altogether, right? It's not connected to this. Now, that's not really concise in communication, because when you're speaking about one thing, you want to speak about that thing and not digress. So digression is a form of not keeping your communication concise, right? So what is concise communication? Your ability to convey information in as few words as possible. Now, I have two very nice quotes for you that may help you remember this topic better. Mark Twain used to be a very famous writer, and he had this quote where he said, listen to it carefully, otherwise you won't understand. He said, I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have the time to write you a shorter one. I'll repeat that. He said, I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have the time to write you a shorter one, right? So that's what he said, which basically meant that if I had to write a really short, precise letter to you, it would take a lot of more time and thought from my side. But if I had to keep on writing, then, it's easier to do. Winston Churchill, another very, very good communicator, had this brilliant thought that he said. He said, ask me to speak for 2 minutes and you'll have to give me 2 days to prepare. Ask me to speak for 2 hours and I'll start right now. Okay. So again, he said, ask me to speak for just 2 minutes on a subject. You really have to give me 2 days to prepare as to what exactly do I need to say in those 2 minutes. Ask me to speak for 2 hours and I'll start right now, right? I can go on and on and on and on talking about different things if you ask me, right? So the real art of communication is to make it precise, which is a combination of specific and concise, right? Now, how to make your communications specific, how to make it concise? Again, you need to ask yourself the question of saying, have you given any irrelevant details? Are there any unnecessary sentences or words? Have you repeated a point several times, right? So that's the thing that you need to ask yourself. And none of these things will happen perfectly, but these are the frameworks and the questions that you need to ask yourself in the brain and hopefully get a good answer for it. There's a very nice blog written by I don't know whether you've heard of the cartoon Dilbert, right? It's a very famous cartoon that comes on Economic Times, comes all over the world, and basically he's written a blog on how to write effectively. And one of the things that he says there, he says, and because he's a cartoonist, right, so he needs to get an entire story across in one strip, one small little strip, he needs to get an entire thought across. So he says a good effective way when you're writing is to try to delete every word that you possibly can delete from a line, right? Try to delete every possible word that you can delete, right? And yet for that sentence to make sense and the person to understand it, because our tendency again is to just use words for the sake of it, right? But on the other side, you need to be specific, and that's the real war that you need to have between. Now, let me give you some examples, right? So read these examples for you to understand how the same communication can be made a lot more concise just by reframing it or dropping words that are not required. Okay, so these are just examples for you to see how You can make communication a lot more concise just by knocking off words that are very often that we use, which are extra, that are not required, right? While writing your communication. So keep that logic in mind. Somebody asked me to go to the previous slide, so I'll just quickly go through it. Okay, so this is what we spoke about, where we said, are you giving irrelevant details? If so, delete them. Are you asking unnecessary words, sentences? Delete them. Are you repeating points again? Delete them. So that's the logic that you need. Okay. So this is the thing about making it concise. Now we're running out of time, so we don't have time for an exercise around that, right? Now let's try to understand how to make our communication clear and simple, right? So this is the third and the last block of what we're doing right now. These are the 5 things, and I want to explain each one of these things to you in detail, right? Of how to make your communication simple and concise. The first one is break your communication down into points, right? That often helps make your communication clear and simple. And the model that you need to use there is the McKinsey pyramid model of communication. Now, I am not going to cover the McKinsey pyramid model of communication in this class, because we have a whole another class dedicated to the McKinsey pyramid model of communication. However, for those of you all who are over enthusiastic and want to read about it, please go to the internet and you can read about the McKinsey pyramid model, or you can attend our class, whatever you choose to do on it, right? So that is one way in which you can simplify and make your communication clear, is by breaking it down into points and giving it a good structure. The number 2 is simplify your language. The number 3 is share examples. The number 4 is illustrate and use diagrams. And the number 5 is encourage users to clear their doubts and ask questions, right? That's what you need to do. Okay, so this is broadly the McKinsey pyramid model. I'm not going to get into it further. Okay, now let's look at what simplify your language means. Okay, avoid jargons, short forms, and difficult words that the other person may not understand, right? Now, what does jargon mean? Jargon means nothing but technical words. That's what jargon means. So avoid using technical words, short forms, difficult words, because people often get confused there when you do that, right? Now, the example that I give, let's assume that there's a very intelligent lawyer on one side and a very intelligent doctor on the other side, right? So these are the 2 parties. Now, very, very bright people. However, if the lawyer uses his technical words with the doctor is not going to understand what he's trying to say. And if the doctor uses his jargon or his technical words with the lawyer, however intelligent the lawyer is, he's not going to understand what the doctor is saying, right? So however smart these people are, they're not going to understand it. Now, if one doctor from the same field is talking to another doctor from the same field, that means both of them are ENT specialists, ear, nose, throat specialists. Both of them are those specialists, and they are kind of sharing their technical words with each other. Maybe they'll understand, no problem. But when you're speaking to people outside your area of your specialization, like you are more often than not, you can't do that. Now, if you've seen from your own past experience of who you like communicating with, if there is a doctor that really simplifies the matter for you and shares the matter, you really appreciate that doctor. Am I right about that? Yes or no? Right? That's the kind of doctor you want to keep going to, because he explains the matter to you, makes it very simple and clear for you to understand. Because if you're not a doctor, otherwise it's going to be so confusing for you. The same thing we appreciate in a lawyer, right? We don't appreciate lawyers that complicate stuff even more for us. We'd appreciate a lawyer that kind of simplifies that complicated topic by not using technical words, short forms, difficult words connected to it, and explain to us in what we call layman's or laywoman's language to us, right? So that's exactly what you need to do when you communicate. Now, if you must use a jargon or can't find a better alternative, explain it when it first appears. So that's a good thing to do, right? If you have to use it, when that word first comes up, explain what that word means to people, right? And then you can continue using it if you first explain it to people. So that's one thing to do. If you use an abbreviation or acronym, spell it out for the first time you use it. For example, if you're writing an email and you need to repeat computer-based training, which is CBT, or communication coaching program, which you want to call CCP, the first time you write communication coaching program, then do bracket show CCP, and then the next few times that you use it, you can just use CCP, right? But you started off by using the entire thing and showing that this is the abbreviation that you're going to be using. And then you go on and use that abbreviation later, which makes it simple for the person to understand it, right? And the last one is use common language when possible, right? That's what you need to do. So if you understand Hindi well and the other person understands Hindi well, try to talk in Hindi. So don't be in a situation where he doesn't understand English too well, but you're speaking to that person in English, right? Then that entire matter will get kind of complicated for that other person, right? So try to find a common language to speak in with people when you're speaking to them, right? So this is one of the things that you can do. The first one is the McKenzie, where break your communication down into points, basically, and sub-points. So that makes it simple and clear for people to understand. Simplify your language when you're speaking to them, right? That's the second thing that happens, is important for you to simplify what you're trying to say. Does this make sense? If this makes sense, give me a big yes in the chat box so that I'm sure that you're on the same page as I am here. And this, by the way, applies to people across all professions. This applies to people across every profession. People make this mistake. You don't need to be a doctor or lawyer to make this mistake, right? I remember like financial advisors. We used to train a lot of them in different banks, and they would often make this mistake of just talking in technical terms with their customers, and their customers would get even more confused. And the, you know, in a way, the worst way to get a person to buy something from you, if they're confused. If a person is confused, he's never going to buy anything from you. You're very unlikely to buy anything from you, right? You want to explain something to them in a simple way so that then they feel confident enough to put their money and buy it, not when they're going to get confused around stuff, right? And that happens. They would make small mistakes like this, which meant talking in terms of technical words, jargon, short forms. Very often they would use a certain short form with their teams internally. They're sitting right next to each other, so both of them know what the short form is, but the world outside, the customer doesn't know, and they make the mistake of using that same word with the customer, which wouldn't work, right? So that's the mistake that they would make. Now, share examples to elaborate the point. Isn't this something that we've learned ever since we were children, basically, of making communication simple and clear? Haven't we heard this where they would say, "Udharan deke samjhao," which means give an example and explain this point. If you remember that through this training program, through this class alone, I've given you so many different examples to explain a point, right? Whether it was specific communication, concise communication, and that kind of helped you understand the matter, I'm assuming, much better than you would otherwise, right? So when you're sharing something, try to give examples. Now, what could those examples be? Okay, so examples give more clarity. So examples make your point clearer, give the receiver more information, decrease the chances that the message will be wrongly understood or wrongly applied in a real life situation, right? That's the advantage of giving examples to people. Now, and examples can be in the form of, this is the third point is very important, right? Examples can be in the form of a typical or representative cases, which basically means, in simple words, it probably means case studies, right? If you give a case study to somebody, that's a form of example when you give somebody a case study, right? When you give or show somebody a sample connected to something, that's a form of giving an example of it, right? And the minute you show that sample to somebody, it becomes much more clearer to them when they see it, as against to you trying to explain it to them verbally, right? And the third one, which is another form of giving examples, is you giving references to people, right? Which we don't do more often than not. If you are briefing somebody on how to make a report, a good idea is to give them a reference of what you want, right? Because the minute you give them a reference, it becomes specific and clear to them. It becomes both things and becomes easy for them to do that job. But if you are not going to take the effort as a communicator to give them examples or a case, a typical case in which that happens, or samples or references of what it is, then don't expect the other person to be clear on what you're saying, right? So that's why good communication takes more time, it takes more effort, it takes more thought, it takes all of these things if you want to be a good communicator. And most people end up, by the way, thinking this is the problem with India, and I've been trying for 10 years to explain to people that most people think good communication is good English. That's what they think, right? And good communication is not good English, right? English is very important, but good communication is not good English. A person may not know big, flowery, Shashi Tharoor kind of words, right? And yet be an excellent communicator. With just a certain amount of fluency, knowledge, somebody that puts more thought, more effort into the communication, and bang, there you are. You'll be better than 98% of the population in India just by doing what we're teaching you to do, right? So that's the way you start communicating, with case studies, with examples, with samples, with references when you're doing it, right? Now, now, the fourth one is illustrate and use diagrams where possible, right? That's the other thing to do, because visual communication such as drawings, illustrations, and images makes it easier for us to explain our message, understand and remember information. It does all these things. That's the beauty about any images, diagrams, or visuals, right? We tend to understand it better. We tend to remember that information as well. Both things will happen when you do that, right? And also it helps you explain kind of complex issues when you're doing it, right? Now, this is the other thing that I suggest to people. A lot of times, if your job involves or revolves around you making a lot of PowerPoint presentations, ensure that your PowerPoint presentations, you're showing your data in the form of diagrams, charts, all of these things, right? That really helps if you're doing PowerPoint presentations. However, if most of your communication does not involve PowerPoint presentations, a lot of times when you're explaining something to a person, you could use a whiteboard. If there's a whiteboard in your office or there's a board in the office, you can just go and kind of draw and like show him that through a diagram that you draw. Like if there's a flow chart, it often when you just, instead of explaining it to people, if you can just draw it on the board, it gives people a lot more clarity in terms of what you're saying. And thirdly, if you don't even have a whiteboard, you don't have a PPT, often just, and if you're explaining something one-on-one to somebody, a great idea is to kind of draw it on a paper right in front of you and kind of show him that. Because the minute you kind of visually show him something, it becomes a lot more simpler for him to understand. And that's why drawings, illustrations, images makes it better. Diagrams, charts makes it much better when you're going to put your communication across, right? So that is something that you need to keep in mind. But I want you to know that don't think that you're somebody that needs to make a PowerPoint presentation to do it. No, you can do it on a whiteboard, you can draw something, right? In sessions like these days, I use these kind of pens a lot to draw stuff and kind of show people, because they tend to understand it a lot better when I draw something and I mark something out for them, right? So that's kind of another thing to do. Now, these are just two kind of examples of that, right? So if I have to talk about an organizational chart, and if I show it like this in a visual kind of format, the organizational chart becomes a lot more easier for people to understand, rather than me explaining it just verbally. I need to support the verbal with a diagram for it to become simple and clear for people to understand. And this is some educational material, right? But this kind of educational material becomes a lot more easier for people to understand, because you're showing a diagram here as to what the water cycle is and how it tends to happen and how it goes, right? So this again becomes a very easy and simple way for people to understand what is happening. That visual really tends to help. So that's what you need to do to communicate well. But don't get scared of thinking that, but I'm not a good artist, I don't draw a lot. It doesn't matter, yeah. I'm a terrible artist myself, but I like to explain stuff to people through my bad drawings, but at least it helps them. It becomes simple and easy for them to understand. Okay. And now here it is, the last point in how to make your communication simple and clear, right? Encourage the receiver to clear their doubts and ask questions. If you want to make your communication simple and clear, this is what you need to do. Now listen carefully. If you are face to face with people, or you're doing a video chat with the person, What your job is to, and you're kind of getting a message across the other side, what you need to do is you need to be very aware of the facial expressions of and the body language of the person that you're speaking to. And if his facial expression suggests to you that something is not clear to him, it is your job as a communicator to stop there and ask him. And that's why it's so important to be aware of his kind of body language and facial expression, right? And then you ask him whether the thing is clear or you've not been clear in any way. That you need to make it interactive that way by looking at his body language, right? Now, the second thing, if you see the first point that I mentioned is break your communication down into points, right? Or sections or points, like in the McKinsey pyramid model. And if you're going to do that and say, if you have 5 points that you want to communicate to the other side, at the end of every point, it is your duty during verbal communication to end the first point and then ask the person from the other side, saying, are you clear on what I'm trying to say? Or do I need to explain this further? Do you have any questions on what I'm trying to say, right? So you need to do that and ask him, and then you're in a way encouraging him to ask you questions. And then when he asks you a question, he says, good, thank God you asked a question, right? So encourage that so that all doubts in their head are clear. And that happens only when you encourage the receiver to ask questions, right? While you're doing that. So after the first point, ensure that you ask that person, if you have any questions, ask the question. Then you move on to the second one, so on and so forth, right? So that's the way you go about doing that. And that's why we have a whole section called after class, right? Where you can ask all the questions that you have and we clear as many doubts as we possibly can. Okay, now when you're writing an email, the thing that you need to do while writing an email is you need to always try to end your emails with a line that says, please get back to me, or feel free to get back to me if you have any questions, doubt, or need any clarifications, right? So again, through your written communication, you're encouraging the other person to call you or to get back to you if he has any confusion, because you don't want him or her to feel awkward to ask questions, right? Because a lot of times people do not ask questions because they feel shy, because they feel scared. And then what happens is they have the wrong brief, or they have the wrong understanding of the issue in their head because they're not asking questions. And it's your job as an initiator of communication and as somebody who's now trained that communication to encourage them actively to ask questions, right? That is when the communication becomes good and clear and simple in the other person's head, right? That's what you need to do. Okay, I hope that. So these are the 5 things that you need to do to make your communication simple and clear. Number 1, you break your points down, right? That's what you need to do. Number 2, right? Try to give examples. If you give examples, and examples are also case studies, cases, references, samples that you give, all those are a part of case studies. Number 3, we said, ensure that you make your communication jargon free, or simplify the language that you speak in, right? So ensure that you do that to make it simple and clear. Number 4, we said, ensure that you use diagrams, illustrations, charts, use all of these things in not just making a PPT and using all these things, but simple pen and paper in front of a person, because the visually when he sees something, he'll understand it a lot better. And the 5th one, encourage the other side to ask questions, right? These are the 5 things that you need to do to make your communication simple and clear. Right now, this is your exercise, quick exercise, very interesting one. Einstein famously said, he said, when speaking to people outside your area of specialization, speak to them like you would to your grandmother or an 8-year-old. So that's what he said. He said the best way to make your communication simple and clear is to talk to people like you would to your grandmother or an 8-year-old, right? And especially people outside your area of specialization. So this is a fun exercise that I have for you, and you can give your answers in the chat box. Let's assume that you are sitting on a flight. I don't know when we're going to get back on flights, but you are on a flight in the middle seat of a flight, okay? And it's a long flight. On the right side, you have a 80-year-old grandmother, right? Somebody your grandmother's age sitting next to you. And on your left side, you have a 8-year-old, right? They ask you a question saying, what do you do for a living? Or what is your, can you explain your job? to me, right? So how would you go about doing that? I hope you're clear about the exercise, right? You need to explain what you do for a living precisely, right? So you need to make it specific. You need to make it simple for him to understand, but you need to explain it precisely. And by that, I mean, you can't just, if you're a CA, you can't just say, I'll explain it by saying, I'm a CA. No, you need to explain exactly what you do, what your job is about to a 8-year-old or a 80-year-old, right? So what you can do is put in your answers in the chat box of how you do it for a 8-year-old, how you would explain it, and how you do it for a 80-year-old as well, right? And then we come to the end of this session. If you have any questions, ask me first, otherwise do the exercise.